So welcome everybody for today's panel, author meets critics panel on Le Capitalisme, les preuves de la pandémie by Robert Boyer. It's a great pleasure for me to moderate and chair this panel. My name is Sigrid Quack. I would like to start by acknowledging and thanking this year's virtual organizers. We are particularly grateful to the Käthe Hamburger Kolleg Center for Global Cooperation in collaboration with the Institute for Work and Qualification and the DFIS, all situated at the University of Duisberg-Essen in Germany. And if you're interested in the work of these academic institutions, you can click on their logos on the homepage of the conference and you will learn more about them. So I would like to introduce first our author today. Robert Boyer is one of the co-founders of the French Regulation School, a prolific author who has developed and disseminated its ideas around the world in collaboration with scholars in other regions, notably in Latin America. He was a long-standing directeur de recherche at the French National Research Center, CNRS, and a directeur d'études at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris, as well as an economist at CEPREMAP. Currently, he is an associate researcher and member of the scientific committee of the Institute of the Americas. He is also a long-standing supporter and honorary fellow of SASE. His book, Les Capitalismes, les preuves de la pandémie, published with La Découverte in 2020, addresses the uncertainties faced in the pandemic, but also speaks to understand to longer-term developments that might arise from it. It therefore speaks excellently to the theme of this year's SASE conference, and we look very much forward to discussing it. Let me briefly introduce the panels. We have a very nice set of panelists discussing the book, and I would like to thank them in advance for joining us. So we will start today with Eleni Tsingou, who is a professor of international political economy at the Copenhagen Business School and an expert on financial and transnational governance with a particular focus on professional networks. She co-organizes the SASE network on regulation and governance. We have also Sébastien Lechevalier, who will join us with his views on the book as an economist and professor at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris. And he is specialized in the Japanese economy and Asian capitalism, on which he publishes widely. He is a co-founder of SASE's Asian Capitalism Network. And our third panelist, Andrea M. Herrmann, is Associate Professor in Innovation Studies at Utrecht University. She studies institutions' influence on incumbent firms, entrepreneurial ventures, and workforces. She is a co-organizer of the SASE network KITE, Knowledge, Innovation, Technology, and Entrepreneurship. Our fourth commentator was meant to be, I'm just checking whether has joined so far, Luiz Carlos Bresser-Pereira, who is an emeritus professor of economics at the Getulio Vargas Foundation in Brazil, and also a former minister of finance of Brazil. So we are not sure what happened here. Maybe we have a time zone conversion issue. We will see. Perhaps he will join us, and then he would be the fourth panelist. So before I give the word, the plan is that I give the word first briefly to Robert for a couple of minutes so he can introduce, say a few words on the motivation of the book and how he thinks about that. And then we will have a round of comments by the panelists, each about 7 minutes in the sequence I suggested. Eleni, Sébastien, Andreas, and if Luiz joins us, Luiz will round it up. And then Robert, you will have time to respond to questions and comments for about 10 minutes, and we would then like to open up for 30 minutes of open discussion with the audience, with the panelists. We keep that flexible, and at the end we have a short round of closing remarks by everybody involved, the author and panelists. So that's the plan for today. And before we start, let me just recap the rules of engagement. So please, panelists, speak loudly loudly and clearly, and I'm afraid that you, Robert, will have to speak very loudly, and maybe everybody has to switch on the micro as much as possible because of our technical difficulties here. The audience members should please mute a microphone so that we don't have technical problems. The slides, everything, of course, is recorded that you have on your screen. And I would suggest that in the discussion, we use the raise hand function. That's easier for me to keep an overview who has raised a hand. We have seminar mode, so people can switch on their cameras and speak on their own. If you prefer to send the comments through the chat, I will read it out for you or the question. But I think we could use the seminar function here to have a lively interaction. So I think that's it. I hope I have not forgotten anything. So let's go to the substance, to this wonderful book that has very, inviting ideas and thoughts and reflections on the long-term outcomes that the pandemic might bring. We're still in the middle of it. And of course, Robert might also want to say a few words on how he sees it today, a year after the publication of the book, which was one of the first to appear during the pandemic and was a very brave enterprise, I think, to pull all this together and to compare it to the financial crisis as well. So Robert, the floor is yours. I know you are an excellent speaker and you like to develop, but it comes with the invitation to keep it brief so that we have also time to listen to the other ones. Thank you.
This was a very special book when an unexpected event, what is to say a virus nobody knew, is interacting with a long-run transformation of various capitalisms. So in a sense, it is the meeting of an event and long-term history. Why I'm so pleased to speak at SASE conference, because you used to have a high specialization of discipline, health economics, macroeconomic stabilization, international economics, social networking and so on. And brutally, everything seems to be linked. Else, suppose engineering new methods for medicine, suppose reassessing the way people were paid and organized. So in a sense, everything becomes mixed. And it is a very good opportunity to praise a French scholar, sociologist, which is coining the term of total social fact, which is a very important element. And what is very important in my feeling is that you have a kind of an analyzer. So in a sense, you can have a radiography. And the first one is that you used to neglect healthcare, and brutally, the presidents and the prime minister become the head of the service of health. Second element, you used to have very austerity-like policy, and brutally, you discover that whatever it costs, we should fight against the pandemic. So a complete shift in the hierarchy. And similarly, you discover that globalization was globalization of trade, production, intellectual exchange, but also viruses. And the fact that viruses are moving at the speed of air travel changed totally the diffusion of the virus in such a way that you realize for the first time that you experiment why you need to overcome the insecurity of health in order to take again the long-term transformation. And the third very basic result, I'm a specialist of crisis. This crisis is very special because in a sense, it is the fact that via containment of the virus, people are not allowed to move, then you stop administratively the economy. And then you have for the first time the fact that a government tries to stop the economy in order to prevent a catastrophic event about mortality. And that is very important. You should imagine that this will stop or reveal a deep crisis. Quite on the contrary, you do observe the surge of platform transnational informational capitalism, in the sense that by teleworking, by telemedicine, by Zoom, by university course at distance, you have a totally new way of organizing labor. You have a new way to follow mobility. So in order to capture the propagation of the virus, you can, via mobile phone, you can have a real-time pictures of the evolution. You have a big uncertainty, but in the crisis, the GAFAM are proving their usefulness. Amazon can continue to deliver the world level. So in a sense, you have a strengthening of the digitization of modern capitalism. And last but not least, you observe that government ask relevant information to GAFAM because the statistical apparatus of the state is very slow. It is quarterly or yearly, whereas in real time, you have the evolution. And then what is very new in this element is that you do consolidate the 2-decade-long trends in contemporary capitalism with the rise of transnational capitalism and the dialectic fighting back of protectionist move, in the sense some states try to react. And you observe an impressive comeback of the state. The state first organized solidarity, state overcome by the control of the central bank, the financing of public debt, and state can coordinate the expectation about how to go out of the crisis. So in a sense, the state was supposed to be the problem becomes a solution. And the big uncertainty compared with my book, how to go out from this system. And I finished by the main argument of the book. Uncertainty about the nature of the virus is making the way out of the crisis very difficult for two reasons. The uncertainty is now about the efficiency of vaccines and the ability to have them at the world level. And the second, the ability to overcome the free lunch, according which central banks were printing all the money was needed. In a sense, you have two new uncertainty, and it is very important for me to update my analysis. And I'm eager to hear you about some of these. Sorry, I had a sophisticated PowerPoint, but the line seems to be too heavy, and I was unable to present it, but no problem. I'm glad to transmit the key findings of the book and the limits, of course.
Thank you very much, Robert, and I hope that most of you could hear Robert at least, you know, what he was saying. So I suggest as we go on that everybody switches on the loudness to the maximum. We have been trying to resolve the problem, but we were not able to do it prior to starting. So thank you very much for this very concise summary, and also pointing towards the new two big uncertainties that we are facing in the pandemic, Robert. I hand it now over to the first commenter. Eleni Tsingou will start with her readings of the book and her comments and share them with us. Please, Eleni, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sigrid, and thank you for this invitation to discuss this book. It was a real pleasure to read this book, and it is, as Sigrid said at the outset, a brave book to be published so early and with so many open questions. And I'm very happy to report that it reads very well, very much so. And I'll be picking up on some of those issues in my comments this afternoon. So the way the book starts by drawing you in is really that essentially at first it reads a little bit like revisiting many of the discussions that as social scientists, I think most of us had in the early days of the pandemic. So it's almost like reading one's own journal, but with someone else's words in it at the very beginning. And that really draws you in, because then you want to see, okay, where do I agree? Where do I depart? Where do my own readings from different literatures come into play in how I interpreted some of those events? And also, I think quite importantly, how much does the location, because we've all been stuck wherever we were in March 2020, how much does that matter in how we've read the beginnings of the crisis and then what's been going on since the publication of the book as well. But of course, the book does a lot more than this, and this is also why we are here today to discuss it. So I will start by focusing on a few aspects which I believe are really quite critical when we're trying to make sense of this pandemic, and which I think the book does very well. I'll start with something that is perhaps quite a banal observation, but I think a really important one. It's a really nice reminder of how the use of the term unprecedented becomes quite unuseful, really, rather quickly. And with that, I think the book also shows us how this impetus that we always hear in discussions when a crisis hits us, about how can we not let a good crisis go to waste. That is also basically a lot of lost words in the mix, and the book sort of goes. Is very clear on that from the outset, and that is done really very well. Perhaps more importantly for our purposes, the book is very precise about how we can use comparisons, what historical comparisons make sense, what country comparisons make sense. And these are not Robert's words, but you could also look at it in terms of, when we are talking about learning, when we are talking about diffusion, what unit of analysis, what level of analysis are we really talking about? And the book has to be commended for being so precise on those issues really early on in the crisis management phase. The book also reminds us that we should not confuse good policy with luck. That there is, when we are trying to get scripts for reading through a crisis, it's very easy to see models everywhere just because a particular country or a particular system appears to have the answers at a particular point, and those of us who would have been having a slightly different discussion 3 months ago than now, and again 3 months from now. So we need to be aware of those things, and again the book does that very well. There are some tentative parallels in the book about how do we think about an epidemic health crisis and the climate crisis. And this is the start of a very important conversation that will go on for some time. And there is an important, I think still obviously a very open question in the book about what this means for international relations, internationalization, etc. And again, I think although this is not the bulk of the book, or the main focus of the book, the analysis does start by providing some good insights about how we can separate questions of coordination between the different types of global governance mechanisms on the one hand, and on the other hand, how do we deal with questions like production, the power of particular companies when it comes to logistics and other things that are relevant, not least the legal framework underpinning all of this. So I would like now to turn to my attention to what I think is the punchiest part of the book, which is chapter 6, and where Robert, I'm sure would have spoken about this more had he not experienced the technical difficulties this afternoon. But this is where the bulk of the analysis about on the one hand, the different types of capitalisms that the book refers to. So the state-led capitalism on the other side, or state capitalism, not necessarily state-led, and platform capitalism on the other. So the ways in which the responses to public health have in some ways helped to legitimize the role of public authorities, and therefore given a new role for the state, necessary role to the state in this instance. And on the other hand, the control and surveillance surrounding platform capitalism, but also the private control that is linked to this. And this also fits, I think, really nice. It's a nice way to pick up some of the conversations that we had this time last year with the last presidential address. What is very interesting in the book is that those two types are not treated in terms of trade-offs. we hear a lot about trade-offs between, on the one hand, surveillance and public health, and on the other hand, civil liberties and the role of the state. This is not what the book does. The book it underlines tensions, it explains the tensions, or at least it starts to point to the tensions that will be with us for some time, no doubt. But this is not about trade-offs. It's a much more sophisticated analysis than that. And I think this is where the book is also very interesting. And it's also poignant because it is not just a discussion that provides us an overview of the key actors. We do get that. And we hear, for example, quite a lot about the role of central banks and how key they have been and how obvious the parallels are between the role of central banks in the financial crisis and what we have experienced in the last 15 months. But there's a lot more there that is up in the air. The book talks about health policy in broader terms and underinvestment over time in health policy. The book talks about education policy, which is also key when we go back to the role of the state in organizing the economy. And the big issue, and again, the book provides some very interesting early insights on this, is what happens in labor markets. And Robert outlines some of the issues that both in the structural factors, the institutional factors where we've seen changes, but many of those discussions are up in the air. And I would say, from what we hear so far, the duration of the crisis will also determine a little bit where we come out on the other side on some of these issues. So I will close my remarks because I'm sure I'm sort of kind of out of time already with two ways in which I think this discussion can move further. So the first one is on the role of experts and professions, and the book talks about the health side and the economy side, but doesn't necessarily go into as much detail as perhaps we would have now about health professionals and economists and how they have interacted. Again, this is a place where the organization of expertise in different national settings will, I think, tell us a lot about illuminate further this particular issue. And the role of different economists and health professionals within state capitalism, as discussed in the book, I think will be a great new chapter in this particular analysis. And my final point is about how crisis is experienced by different types of publics. Of course, crisis is experienced by those in charge who have to make decisions, including firefighting decisions at the outset, but also by publics. And the book touches upon this in talking about public opinion and civil liberties on the one hand, economic hardship issues on the other. And this is, of course, a shout out to comparative political economy. But it also, I think, calls for us to think about how for different audiences, we have perhaps slightly different definitions of what the crisis is, what the way out of the crisis is, and indeed when the crisis is actually over. And with that, I will close and looking forward to hearing what the other panelists have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Eleni. Very interesting comments and observations. And I hand immediately over to Sébastien, please.
Thank you very much, Sigrid. Thank you very much for this invitation. I will try to share my slide. I don't know if it works. Yes. So I would agree first with you, Sigrid. So this book is a tour de force, and everybody had his own or her own expression of the coronavirus crisis. But I'm very pleased to see that this crisis had the same effect on Robert's than the crisis of Fordism. So congratulations, Robert. As it has been said, this book is very rich, so I will not try to deal with all the issues. I will consider maybe 5 points. The first one is to be found in the chapter 1, and I think it's very useful. We have to qualify, label what we did experience since the end of 2019. And Robert is very right to say that it was not a recession. It was not endogenous reversal of the economic cycle, but a political and administrative decision to stop some economic activities. So it means we need more general theories of crises and their diversity. My question then is how to account for the heterogeneity of this political and administrative decision, heterogeneity between countries and heterogeneity within countries. Second point is more methodological, and it's more a contribution of Robert on the position of economics. And Robert starts with the idea that this crisis was a time of a changing hierarchy, but it was a changing hierarchy in the reality, but it was also a changing hierarchy, a changing status for economics. And clearly, this crisis is a situation that shows that we need, if not reintegration of economics within social sciences, to me, we are still far from this, despite the effort of our dear colleagues at SASE. At least it shows that the dialogue is between economics and social sciences. Of course, I consider myself that economics is a part of social sciences, but it's not the case of a standard economist. A dialogue is required. I will not enter into the detail here, but in the book you see Robert reviews several fundamental difficulties that economists are facing in the context of this crisis. These difficulties are related to their methodology, to their approach of equilibrium, to the fact that they try to put aside political, social, or life-related variables. This crisis, to me, and I was convinced by the book, and I will now organize the rest of my comments based on this, shows the interest of non-standard approaches like the regulation theory. So the interest is, in the case of this pandemic, not so much to understand the origin of the pandemic, but to analyze the crisis itself. And to me, regulation theory is, first of all, a theory of crisis. Second interest, the approach like the regulation theory opens the possibility indeed between economics and other social sciences. It helps us to go beyond simple economic calculus. Third point, and I agree with Eleni, and I will spend a little more time on this. This crisis, and I like very much the chapter 6, help us to revisit the topic of diversity of capitalism. And maybe finally, I think there is a particular contribution of Robert in the book and a particular contribution of the regulation theory to look at history and learn lessons from it at some conditions. So I would like to spend a little time on the chapter 6 that describe a dialectical movement between emergence and development of platform capitalism and the rediscovery of various types of state capitalism. Maybe I would like to ask not one, not two, not three, but 4 questions to Robert. Robert, first, what are the continuities and discontinuities with diverse diversities that you contributed to analyze? I give here some examples. Second question, what is the nature of platform capitalism? Is it driven by technologies, which would be a little surprising if I understand your approach of technology? And what is the connection of this platform capitalism to financialization? Third question, is the label state capitalism general enough? Is there any alternative to the state and the market? And last question, it's an optional one, in more concrete terms, do you think that this crisis is of the kind of a rare critical juncture that may contribute to a change of the hierarchy in the global economy? I think my time is limited, but just mention, I think, the interest of the discussion from a methodological perspective, the discussion in the book on the way we may learn from history. And here I would like to ask two questions to Robert. So could you explain to us the major methodological conditions to adopt the historical approach to crisis? I think your book, of course, is adopting this historical approach, but also shows some limitation of trying to simply learn from history, because history that never repeats itself. And the second question is maybe more a private one. I do remember a book published in French a long time ago that was not published in English, I think, about irreversibilities in the economy. And I think we did experience some irreversibilities, and I would like to ask you to account. How can we account for that? My last point is maybe less a question than a wish. Reading your book, I found I was convinced how it's necessary to put health and more generally human reproduction at the center of our research agenda. I'm also convinced that the model that you present in the chapter 5 of your book, the so-called anthropogenetic regime, is certainly, we say, a wish, but it's also very useful concept to understand some evolution in the economy. So my wish is to be able that some of us would contribute in following Robert's contribution with maybe a more general question statement on the relationship between technology and society, which we believe to be at the center of the present crisis. And we also expect that looking at the issues of health policies and practices should be done through a dialogue between science and technology studies and political economy of innovation. I will stop here, and I thank you for your attention. Thank you. Let me try to stop. Okay, done.
Thank you very much, Sébastien, also particularly on this, diving into chapter 6, which is a very important part of the book. And so we hear now Andrea Herrmann's readings of the book. Please, Andrea.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I will also dive in particular into chapter 6. But first of all, I also want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss the book, because it's, of course, very timely, and we all ask ourselves, where will this pandemic lead us to? And yeah, what kind of socioeconomic transformations will it bring upon us? And so, Robert, I read the book with really a lot of fascination. It made me think in many regards about the crisis and its trajectories. And I've organized my comments also along 4 questions that I have. So I think in my case, you should better not say author meets critics, but author meets questions. And I think the first point of reflection and my first question is, to what extent your theory towards a societal transformation, towards a more anthropogenetic regime is indeed state-led? Because as you describe in chapter 1 and 2, and as you also presented, your core argument is that with the standstill of the economy, the state again became the lender of last resort, and now it re-experienced a lot of power, which he had previously not experienced. And this now leads the state, or enables the state, to lead towards a new form, maybe, a new regime of society. So I was wondering to what extent also the economy in and by itself will maybe contribute to this process. Because if you think about it, you could also think of the crisis as some sort of major beneficial constraint that, as Wolfgang Streeck may have coined it, to the extent that from one day to the next, everyone had to reorganize the private and corporate all-day operation. And with regard to companies, it meant that from one day to the next, they had to rethink how to organize business meetings, how to organize remote office, how to make use of their office spaces, how to reorganize, reinvent their business ideas so that they could continue to stay in business. And it seems to me that this major constraint of lockdown has triggered a lot of innovation and entrepreneurial potential within the economy. And here I wonder to what extent this more self-driven economic transformation is compatible with your more state-led argument of socioeconomic transformation. Now, the second point that I want to make is also about what we have heard from previous presenters about this discrepancy to some extent between state-led capitalism and platform capitalism. And I do agree very much with your assessment, Robert, that the crisis has accelerated the development of the platform economy. And it also has accelerated a lot of problems that come with it, in particular the monopolistic power of the big five that you mentioned, Google and Microsoft and Apple and Amazon. But it occurs to me that the platform economy is much bigger than just these 5 companies. As you may know or not know, I'm studying together with my team, which is also present today. We are studying the gig economy. So we're studying platforms that transact labor services. And we are asking to what extent this really is a global economy. Is this a global labor market? And very interestingly, we see that this is not the case. So one of my PhD students is currently writing a paper where he shows that hiring even of online services like translation or programming, so of tasks that can be completed everywhere in the world, even of these tasks, hiring takes place along the lines of national boundaries. So companies have a strong preference of hiring gig workers from their own country. So even in the first truly global labor market that exists within platform capitalism, we see that the nation state still has a central place, so to say. And in addition, we also see that platforms adjust to national regulation. So also another paper that is written by my PhD student shows that one of the biggest cleaning platforms, Helpling, is adjusting its business models to national regulation of the respective country's cleaning sector. So taken together, it seems to me that the platform economy has this strong national aspect. It operates internationally, but it is grounded in nation states to which it adjusts. And this has 2 implications. I do not see this as a very international business, so to say, but I see it as a combination of national entities that together form platforms. And it also, in the very end, the state has been in the driving seat and is in the driving seat, irrespective of the crisis. So the regulation that we now see of the big 5 with regard to changes in competition laws in order to avoid cartels, in the very end, comes from the United States, comes from the European Union and Germany. So nation states individually take action, and I see how they have been and are very powerful towards platform capitalism. So I think my question to some of these arguments is, was it really, or is the crisis necessary, or how important has been the crisis to enable this regulation? And I would argue that it would have happened even without. So this is the question here: is this really the crisis that has been driving this regulation? And the third point where I had a question is, or concerns the variety of pandemic trajectories that you describe, and which I found particularly insightful, and how this variety of trajectories relates to this argument that we may see a socio-economic transformation towards one regime, one system, namely the one of the anthropogene or anthropogenetic one. And here, I think what I want to say is I really enjoyed reading into the different trajectories you described with regard to how governments could react to the pandemic, how quickly they could react, how severely they were hit by the crisis. And you also very interestingly framed these trajectories within this idea of the trilemma that we or states face between securing public health on the one hand, enabling economic recovery on the other, and at the third end also guaranteeing individual freedom. And you very insightfully describe how this trilemma basically has been addressed very differently between countries. And since you point to this variety of pandemic trajectories, I was wondering whether this argument, which seemed to me to be one of convergence, how this is compatible with this more divergence argument towards one anthropogenetic system. And then last but not least, what I was wondering is about the aspect of well-being that is at the center of the anthropogenetic system, because you describe, or you express the hope that we will see a socioeconomic transformation towards this regime anthropogenetic, which is based on well-being, meaning oriented towards culture and health and education. And you portray this as an antagonist to capitalist consumption. Now, it seems to me that for many, well-being comes from capitalist consumption. So consumption is a source of well-being for many, not for all, but for quite some. So I was wondering how this polar argument can be reconciled. So just to sum up, I think the four questions that I really, your book made me think about with regard to the pandemic is, to what extent transformation will need to be and will actually be state-led, or rather come from within the economy. To what extent there really is platform capitalism is international, or is it more rooted in national systems, so that the state indeed has the power to regulate it irrespective of the crisis? To what extent do we have this argument of variety being compatible with the one regime that you described, the anthropogenetic regime? And last but not least, to what extent does well-being also arise from capitalist consumption? Thank you.
Thank you very much for very concise questions, but also thoughts on the book that push also beyond the book. Thank you very much to all of you. So in the situation of a slightly difficult bilateral communication, Robert, we have to think how we proceed. So my suggestion would be maybe that we cut your answers into shorter bits, because for some people it seems to be really nearly impossible to hear you. So I would like to give you now the opportunity maybe to pick 3 points from the answers and to respond, and invite everybody to switch on the output as far as possible. And then maybe we have another round with Q&A, and we give the word back to you. I just want to avoid too long periods where at least some people here in this virtual room have really difficulties hearing anything. I hope you understand. So Robert, maybe you would like to come back to the anthropogenetic pathway and the questions that were related to it, or would you like to pick other points that were mentioned, maybe 3 of them, and iterate with Q&A and give it back to you in intervals?
Model. Basically, it can be declined in 2 or 3 different ways. The American one, the rich people are in good health, and the minority are experiencing a reduction of life expectancy. So in a sense, embedded in the individualism of American society, you can have the idea that this impoverishing model is for the rich people. They will become eternal, so augmented humanity. Let's go to Japan. The idea came out, my visit in the end of the 90s, in Japan, in the sense that people are aging, you have a quasi-stagnation of the economic situation, but you have social transfer to the aging population in such a way that they can enjoy life, even if they are more than 80 years old. So, and the intermediate model will be the social democratic model of the style of Denmark, in the sense that you have a very democratic education system, a very collective vision of culture, and the way all the gain you have in being competitive on the world market is converted into services to the citizen, rearing children in good agency, promoting free or high quality university, and so on. So again, you have the following. Like in the mass production model of the Fordist period, you have various ways, according to the national tradition, how to get compromise. And the stability of the compromise is very interesting one. You have a very collectivist vision on one side, or you have a very social democratic or individualistic, and we gave 2 different models. And it is a reply to the question of technology. Technology are depending from the social compromise. And therefore, what is very, for example, in the US, with obesity, with drug addiction, mortality, and so on, you have discarding, preventing people from being ill, spending a lot of money just to have a reduction of life expectancy of some of the people. So again, this model is very different, very linked to tradition of having compromise and the ability of government. Last question. There is, with President Biden, you have a struggle. Will GAFAM obey to the fact that they should pay taxation not only in the US, but the rest of the world, or due to their increasing returns, their ability to force down the liquidity of the stock market, they're accumulating incredible financial wealth and ability to develop new technology, they will control government or will government control them? Before Biden, the Senate was unable to apply antitrust measure to GAFAM. With Biden and the new secretary, the new attorney, maybe you have a kind of dismantling. So I think the jury is still out. Nobody knows the outcome. But let me mention one of my preoccupations, the case of China. China is having a platform capitalism centered over the perpetuation of the Communist Party at the power, in the sense that the social control go along with the economic dynamism. And this model is prospering in the present crisis. What impressed me is that Asian capitalists have been thriving under the crisis because they have been able, by organization, the healthcare, to benefit from the new techniques and the ability to support the pandemic. So you have the GAFAM and you have the nationalistic continental vision of state capitalists aligned with platform capitalism. So you understand again the huge diversity. And my argument to reply to Sébastien, you have continuity in the diversification, in a sense, an acceleration of the difference. Last remark, nobody spoke about European integration. Europe is the weak partner of the world economy, and it is weak due to the lag in reacting. So in a sense, you have widening divergence and even accelerating divergence. And this is impressive for a crisis. In crisis, you have on the contrary, tabula rasa. You start again. No, you continue the same game. And that is, it's a very specific crisis. Sorry for the bad quality of my night, but I enjoy very much your question. I'm waiting for the other round of questions.
It makes mistakes, but it might help under the given circumstances. And if the pandemic has taught us one thing, we need to be flexible and inventive to to deal with the challenges in our everyday life. So thank you for developing further on these issues that you picked, Robert, and the variety of these anthropogenic pathways and how they link to each other. So I would suggest we open now the Q&A, the floor for a couple of people from the audience, and I would encourage people also to engage with comments that panelists have made, so we can have a kind of all-around discussion between panelists, audience. Robert, we will ask you to come in again. Please, are there questions and are there comments from the audience or from the panelists to each other maybe also? So please use the raise hand function so that I can see you.
I have another question, which is a bit pragmatic, and it points to what you said also, Sigrid. Robert, you had to submit your manuscript, I think in October 2000. And I mean, the pandemic has been going on and experienced its second or third wave, depending on the country you were in, only afterwards, and to some extent it has been even stronger. So I was wondering if you had the chance to have one more year of writing your book, would this have altered your arguments? And if so, in which regards?
Mm-hmm. Robert, would you like to answer? Then I switch on the transcript again.
Question. That remains central is the question of radical uncertainty. because most of the people thought when in January you invented 3 or 4 vaccines, all the government said the crisis is over. No, because nobody knows the efficiency and the ability to deploy at the world level the vaccine. So the star of the situation is uncertainty. Nobody knows. And my prognosis, because I've been studying, I turned from macroeconomist to specialist of epidemiological models. With a high probability, you
Robert, now something, we cannot hear you.
Okay, so you have, my argument is that instead of having one day, at the end of the year, the COVID-19 vanished, not at all. You will have permanent mutation, moving from one region to another region, in the sense that you have to adapt to a new regime. So what was supposed to be temporary will mean a permanent adjusting of the threat of pandemic. And this is a novelty, because at the early beginning, you could imagine it is a one shot. No, it is a chronicle problem you have to be addressed. And this changed dramatically globalization. You have to give more power to World Health Organization in order to have the observatory all over the world to prevent the huge demographic disaster that we were observing. So the big novelty is the following, and second following. Government perceived that legitimacy from citizens is important. In the past, they were pleased to the financial markets. And a good government had a low interest rate and so on. Now, look at the elections. People will say, the government will be able to deal with our everyday problems. And I think this is changing the justification, like in the book by Wolfgang Street, Buying Time. Once upon a time, everything was about international finance. Now you have to play domestic policy, which explains, for example, the brusque change from Trump to Biden. This is impressive because in the long run, you have to restore the social stability of the US society. So, and this has been underestimated in the sense. Globally, willing or not willing, governments have to try to implement a little bit of this anthropocentric model. And this was not so evident. On the contrary, I'm very pessimistic about the long-term viability of the euro, because the new generation plan is only transitory for northern countries, but it is a first step towards federalism for Italy, for France, and Spain. This contradiction will be difficult to overcome. So what remains true, be careful. We have two weak partners in the world economy: Latin America, which is in total despair, and Europe, which is the next victim in the long run adaptation to the repetition of pandemia. So you are right. I need to add another book. Another reason is to assess the role of economists, medical staff, and politicians. And I think you have, and it is an absolute new problem. If medicine was a science, government would follow science, but they are not. Science is in the making. We will know 10 years ahead how to cure the virus, but we don't know. Second, economists, when the economy stopped, market equilibrium vanishes, and Sébastien pointed it out very well. Standard economists have been silent because they are not operative. And therefore, the politician, it was the case in France, epidemiologists make mistakes. Economists are not relevant. Therefore, I am in charge of overcoming radical uncertainty. So in a sense, you have three medical science, economics, and political talent. And in the long run, you have political talents in the sense, if the scientists are not able, I will make my decision. And again, this is a consolidation of state autonomy. State is not the servant of science, no. It is the servant of society or will to govern. And this is very, so you have a larger modesty about scientism. Okay, so science is a process. It's not an open book, how to solve pandemics. And this, again, this modesty is very important to understand.